Welcome to the Modern Homesteading Podcast, where we journey down the path of the modern homesteading movement by sharing the stories and ideas of homesteaders around the world. So whether you're just thinking about someday living the homesteading lifestyle or have been for many years, we want to help everyone homestead today for a better tomorrow.
Well, hello. I'm your Modern Homesteading host, Harold Thornborough, and welcome to the Modern Homesteading Podcast. We're glad you're joining us today. On today's show, I have an interview with Sherry Willis from the Half-Pint Homestead.com, and she's going to share with us a little bit about her journey and what's been going on at her homestead, and talk a little bit about the business she runs from her homestead, selling fodder systems and grow barrels and things like that. And she's got a complete line of products that she sells, and it's a great interview. We discuss everything from urban homesteading to the ordinances that follow that. We talk about things like her products, her grow barrels, and her microgreen systems, and especially excessively, we're going to talk about growing fodder. And I think we even have a few minutes in there where we talk about tiny house living. So stay tuned. It's a great interview. I'm joined today by Sherry Willis. Sherry runs the website halfpinthomestead.com. And Sherry's journey has sort of went the reverse path of most homesteaders, as you'll hear from her in a few minutes. But she has taken what she has, and she's embraced the homesteading lifestyle. And with that, Sherry, welcome to the Modern Homesteading Podcast.
Well, thank you. I'm glad to be here.
Well, we're glad to have you. Sherry, why don't you just take a couple minutes and share a little bit about yourself and how you got into homesteading to begin with, and then how you ended up where you are today.
Well, I actually grew up in Wyoming, and I grew up on a genuine homestead. We had 283 acres. In the mountains, the Wind River Mountains of Wyoming. And as a child, it never occurred to me that we lived differently than everybody else. I mean, we had our own beef, and we had horses, and, we made cheese, and we did all these things. And it never occurred to me that everybody else didn't do that. As an adult, I kind of went to college for a while and wandered around, and then in my late 20s, I ended up on a place with 7 acres, and started out with horses. Horses are always the gateway. Mm-hmm. And ended up with a milk cow and some sheep. Actually had 2 milk cows at one point, and decided milking 1 cow was fun, milking 2 cows was a chore. I'm not going to do it. So, but I would raise orphan calves and all of that. Well, a situation came up, and I ended up in Missouri, actually living off-grid for a year and a half in the woods. Oh, and wow. I had plans of basically replicating my homestead that I had in Wyoming in the woods in here, and discovered that, woods are not a great place for cows, and trees are few and far between. In Wyoming, I decided I didn't want to cut down my beautiful trees, so I got goats instead of a cow, and I love goats. I would never go back to a cow after goats, because there's so much less work, and with a cow, if something happens to your cow, you pretty much put all your eggs in one basket. You can have 2 or 3 goats and still feed them less than a cow, and if something happens to one, you still have some.
Sure.
So there are some real advantages to small livestock that I don't think people appreciate. I can throw them in the back of my little Chevy Colorado. But since I live in the real world and had to have a job that was 50 miles away, I made the decision to buy this little house in town. And I mean in town. It is 1.5 blocks from town square. It is in town. And it came with 3 small lots, so there's about 1/5 of an acre. And I decided, well, let's see what we can do with this, because I didn't want to give up what I was doing. And I love the fact that I don't actually have to have a vehicle. If my truck breaks down, I can pretty much walk to everything I need without really a lot of trouble. So that's kind of comfort to me. So I put a privacy fence up and built a little hen house under my deck, and I designed a rabbit cage that takes less wire and works real well because it has a built-in hay feeder, and started seeing what I could make of this little 1/5 of an acre with almost no sunlight because there's huge trees on this place. So.
Yeah, that's pretty interesting. So it is the true urban homestead, really. And I assume you don't run into any local ordinance problems out of that or anything? Because some cities I know have a real problem with that.
West Plains has quite liberal laws, and one of the keys is to build a relationship with your neighbors, because our city, basically, if people don't complain, they leave you alone. So I talked to my neighbors before I started, and eggs and cheese tend to show up on their doorsteps occasionally.
Sure, yeah, that's smart.
And,
that's
so there's that, and then really the only thing you can't absolutely are not supposed to have in our town is pigs, but I'm getting ready to maybe do some miniature pigs, and I can claim that they're pets, because those are, and that is like the miniature goats. A lot of times you can get away, since they're kind of an exotic animal, you can get away with saying, well, they're pets. They're exotic pets.
Right. Yeah, I know that's in a lot of, a lot of cities are even loosening up on a lot of those laws. And there still might be rules against like a rooster or something loud, but a lot of them are starting to open up to the ideas of chickens and even goats and things like that. I know a lot of the larger metropolitan cities are even becoming, more open to that idea.
Well, I know that both Kansas City and St. Louis allow goats and chickens. Kansas, now it's kind of interesting because Kansas City, Kansas does not allow, and Kansas City, Missouri does. So if you move across the river, and they enforce those codes because there's been some issues. So but I went ahead and actually did some research before I moved into town, just to see what the laws on the books are like. Now, that is not to say that laws can't be changed.
Right.
And it's a good idea to be prepared for that. If you're gonna, I would never tell anybody to break the law, but sometimes it's better to beg forgiveness than ask permission. And,
right.
Be prepared.
I think you're right about, it's really enforced when neighbors complain. And if you can keep your neighbors happy, then, it's not usually a problem. But you're right, some neighborhoods is a problem. And then I guess you got to call your chickens parrots and call them pets, right?
Well, and I do have a privacy fence.
Right.
That I keep everything behind. And the reason for that is okay, so my neighbors don't complain, but a lot of times the complaints come from people who are not actually impacted by what you're doing, but they're just bored or crabby or I don't know. They don't like the concept because there's still an idea that keeping animals in an urban area is poor. It's a sign of poverty. Only poor people do that, and I think that's slowly being eaten away, but there still is that, people move to the city to get away from that kind of thing, and so there is that stigma of, well, only poor people keep, chickens were called yard birds, and it's like, I'd never heard that term before, and somebody said something, and I'm like, well, I guess.
Yeah, I think you're right. I mean, there is a stigma to that, but I also think you're right that it seems to be kind of fading away, and I don't know, people are becoming more open to the urban homesteading lifestyle. I think there's just been so much attention given to it lately that people are somewhat fascinated by it, and in some communities there is, the stigma is a little stronger than in other places, but I find that, as I talk to people, that it's definitely becoming something that people are fascinated by. And, I know I live within the city limits as well. And I've got a pretty good sized yard, but it's actually in town. And, but what I find is a lot of my neighbors are kind of fascinated with what I'm doing, and they're okay with it. Now, that's not to say I want to go ringing bells and bringing the whole town in to look at it, because you never know when there's going to be a problem. But, if you're getting along good with your neighbors, it's been my experience that there's a lot of fascination to that lifestyle.
Well, and I think people are becoming aware of the weaknesses in our industrialized food system. Not only the antibiotics that they use and all the fuel. I don't know that people are, but the fact that it's not healthy. I mean, all of a sudden we're seeing these poor kids who are, morbidly obese at 12. But we never had that when we were kids.
Right. And just cancer. I mean, everybody knows somebody that has cancer at a fairly young age these days, So I think in a lot of it is people are realizing that, this isn't normal. There's something going on, and we need to eat better. We need to, change our lifestyle up a little bit. And I think that's something that's causing people to buy into that lifestyle a little bit more.
And then there's kind of there was a back to the land movement in the 70s. Which we were already on the land, so that passed us by. But,
Right.
But this is kind of a similar revival, I think. But people are starting to look at things a little differently and realize that, there aren't the wide open spaces that there used to be. But there's a lot of, especially in urban areas like Detroit and places that had a manufacturing base. There are so many abandoned places, so many abandoned spots. Yeah. That's all land that can be healed and put back to use for people. And there are some really interesting projects going on in some of those areas.
Yeah, I read a bunch of that on the internet and stuff, and seen some of what's going on. There's a lot of people buying these old rundown city lots and doing some great things with them. And that's what kind of caught my eye with your website. I noticed and read your story a little bit, and you were doing it on a small city lot. And, what made me really pay attention to what you were doing is so often I hang out in some Facebook communities and such of homesteading communities, and so many people come on there and say, one of these days maybe I can get 100 acres and become a homesteader. And I just want to scream at them and say, you can be a homesteader now. There's things you can do.
You don't have to have even 1 acre.
Right, yeah.
You don't have to have a half acre. You can keep, you can have a window box.
Exactly.
And, I mean, you can do hydroponics. There's so many options now that we didn't used to have.
Right.
A little greenhouse on your porch. Anything. And it's kind of interesting because I don't know if you saw my garden barrel.
I did, and I was going to talk to you about that because that's another thing. I noticed that, there's so many of these people who are in these urban areas, and it's, maybe difficult for them to dig up a bunch of ground or even have a big area to do things, and you're making it easier for them. I see you got some products that are actually helping them to do that right where they're at.
Well, the thing about the garden barrels is I'm not a very good gardener. I'm a pretty good gardener in May, but I'm a dismal gardener by July because it's hot and I don't want to go out and weed. So the garden barrels are great because I have them set up on a drip system with a timer, so I don't have to remember to water them. And there's no weeding, really. And, you don't have to dig anything. I like planting things. I just don't want to do it more than once.
You like to plant and then harvest. Yeah.
That's pretty much. And that you have almost no weeding. And, you can choose high dollar crops. Okay, maybe you're not going to grow potatoes in that, although I do have something else to grow potatoes in. But strawberries, I love strawberries, and they are the highest pesticide crop you can buy. They have the most pesticide residue. Those and apples.
Right.
So, people think they're getting these healthy foods from the store, and that might not be so.
Yeah, I was noticing what caught my eye out of all your products was originally your fodder systems, because I have rabbits as well, and I do some fodder, grow some fodder for them, and it just caught my eye. I was actually on Craigslist when I first seen your products, and I thought, well, that's pretty neat. Somebody's actually out there building these systems and helping other people get set up with it, and it's a great way to feed your livestock. And you want to talk a little bit about that?
Sure. I actually started that a couple years ago. I was actually researching fodder beets because I was kind of looking for some ways to supplement the feed of my animals. I don't like pelleted feed for the simple fact that you don't really know what's in it. I mean, protein could mean ground up baby chicks, or it could mean, whatever, soy. So I don't care for pelleted feed, and I kind of wanted to get away from that. Well, the concept of hydroponic fodder came up when I was looking at fodder beets. And at the time, there was just nothing that wasn't huge industrial scale. I mean, there was nothing even close enough to small for me. I had 3 rabbits and 5 chickens, and I was planning on getting a couple of goats. So,
right.
And so I kind of did some research and decided, hey, I'm gonna see if I can just build something. It needs these things. What can I do to build it? And so I started that in September of 2012, and I sold my first one that month.
Wow.
And I ended up actually expanding because I started out with just a 6 tray, which is what I needed, and I expanded it up to an 18 tray, which gives you 3 trays a day, and decided that's as big as I was going to go. I didn't want to go any bigger. There were already people selling big ones. So then I actually stepped down, and I have a micro and a mini, which are just tabletop models for people who have 5 chickens or a few rabbits or whatever. So, but it's all automated because I know me, and I'm not going to water them. If it wasn't automated, I wasn't going to do it. So.
So you've pretty much built selling these products. Is it a full-time business, part-time business?
It's a full-time business.
Oh, wow. So you're doing pretty good selling all your products then. That's
Yes. And then I do some writing and
sure. I also see.
I'm just getting ready to finish a book on keeping urban livestock.
Awesome. Well, I know that like the products that you sell, some people can take those and turn a business, use those products to even start a business of their own. Like I seen you had a microgreens kit that you sell as well. And boy, it wasn't so long ago I was hearing a podcast of a guy who was running a microgreens business out of his basement and selling to restaurants there in his town, and he had 2 people working for him. I mean, he was running a full business, ended up selling the business because it was so successful. So, I mean, those products themselves can lead to people starting businesses.
Well, and there are some people who actually sell fodder to people who, just have a few chickens and don't want to mess with, growing their own or whatever. You can also use the systems to grow wheatgrass for juicing. So I don't drink the stuff myself, but people like it.
Oh yeah.
So yeah, there's a lot of potential. I'm working on some different designs to kind of optimize some of my fodder systems so that you can get more for less. And it's a little different technique. So I'm kind of excited about that. And
now, when you were saying a few minutes ago that these are automated, did you say you set these up to be automated to water themselves? Or
yes,
okay.
They have their own pump and timer. They come with a pump and timer, and they water themselves
that's great.
on whatever intervals you set them up. Because, like I said, I know myself, and if I was going to do this, it was going to have to water.
Yeah, that's interesting because like what I've got, you have to manually pour the water through them, and then it drains down through them, and you do that once a day. And I think that's how most people have theirs set up. And so that's interesting that you've got yours set up to take care of itself. That would make it a lot better.
Yeah. Well, these, and generally every 4 hours it waters, and because the watering does a couple things. Not only does it water the seed, but it also aerates it so you don't get the anaerobic bacteria and stuff. So
right.
It's a little cleaner because it can get pretty icky. If you're
right. Well, yeah. I know a lot of people.
diligent.
A lot of people that set them up have a lot of trouble with mold and stuff. If they don't have them set up right.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah.
And mold, you always fight mold.
Mm-hmm.
fodder is just a race against time with mold, and I'll have people email me and say, oh, so-and-so said their system doesn't get mold or whatever, and I'm like, that's not true.
Yeah.
Because it's the perfect conditions for mold. I mean, fodder is the perfect conditions for mold. So that's why I set mine up as a 6-day cycle rather than an 8-day like some of them do, because of the mold and because it starts to lose nutrition as it gets taller too. Yeah. Like people are wanting all this real tall grass. Well, you actually don't want the tall grass because you're putting those nutrients that used to be available into lignin, which is indigestible. So you don't want that.
Right. So it's important also just to have the right size setup for your livestock too. You don't need the extra. You can't let it sit there longer. You have to keep a good rotation going on.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. And that's why it's never going to be like a really probably big commercial thing unless there's some serious, because it doesn't transport. It doesn't keep. You can keep it 12 to 24 hours in the refrigerator, but you really need to feed it, right away.
Right. And I'm with you on that. We start raising our own animals because we want to eat healthier, and if we're feeding them this commercial feed that, isn't healthy, we're eating that too. So, I want to feed them.
And in a higher concentration.
Sure. Yeah. So you want to feed them stuff that's actually good for them and in return be better for us. So yeah, I'm with you on that. Right. I mean, because so often people think, well, I just want to raise mine, and it's just instantly going to be healthier. Well, if you're raising it the same way or even maybe worse, then it's not going to be. So yeah, I think it's important.
Right.
Well, I'm just excited about what you're doing because I love to hear about people taking their situation and no matter where they're at, what they're doing, and doing something with it. And I love what you're doing as far as running a little homesteading business. You've taken your skills, your know-how, and you're sharing it with others by providing products for them. And I think that's really great. I hope a lot of other people take what they love, their passion, and they do something with it as well, because one thing I've seen in this world is so many people are just kind of trapped, in this vicious cycle of going to work, coming home, doing the routines, going to work, coming home, doing it again, and they're never happy, and they always talk about wanting something better, wanting to have some kind of freedom,
or someday when everything's perfect.
Right, and
someday might never come.
Exactly, and we're probably all guilty of that at some point in our life. I know I have been, but you're right. You just need to step up and do something that makes you happy and that sets you free from the hustle and bustle of the regular world. And you know what? It looks strange to some people, but I think you see that it's it's a way better way of living.
It is. I have so many more choices in my life. Now, part of the reason I could do this is because I chose a very small house. My house is 488 square feet. So it's no one guesses that when they walk in. It's hilarious because but it's a very small house. The property didn't cost that much. So my debt was low, and that gave me a lot more freedom to do what I wanted.
Well,
and that's when people are like, how do I start? That's my first thing I tell them is start paying your debt down, because if you're saddled with debt, you have to stay where you are.
Exactly. You're so right. And boy, it sounds like you're maybe one of these people who just began and started the whole tiny house fad that's going around, right? That's a big thing these days.
Actually, I was kind of a fan of it. Yeah. Now, the real tiny houses are like 100 square feet.
Right. Yeah.
I love the concept. I'm not sure that I would actually love the reality of it. Yeah. I love the idea. Let's just put it that way.
I love people's commitment to say, I'm going to not be normal and I'm going to live like this. But at the same time, as a homesteader, I know I like to have enough things around me to where I can be sustainable. It's kind of hard in a small house like that.
Right.
But,
and you do, even with this small house, part of my interest in the tiny houses is I look at how they use space, and then I try to emulate that in my own home.
Right.
So you can tuck things here and tuck things there, and it's amazing what you can do with 6 inches.
Right.
Really.
Yeah. Yeah, a small kitchen is kind of a challenge. That's probably the toughest place in the house to, because that's where you do. Seems like where we do a lot of our, stuff is in the kitchen, and we got a pretty small kitchen, and that makes it difficult. But other than that, you can usually survive a small bedroom or even a small living room or whatever.
But I did move up from a camper trailer, so
a big step up, yeah, no doubt about it.
Right. So 500 square feet seemed like a lot. It's like 488 square feet is what.
Absolutely,
I have,
so. Yeah, that's quite a step up. And I seen a picture of looking at it right now, actually, on your website, your little house. It's a pretty nice little place, actually.
I keep saying I'm going to do a video tour of it for my website, but I've pretty much gotten every room finished. Because of course when you move into a house, you have to redo it the way you want it to be. So the only thing that's left is the kitchen, which is, of course, the most expensive room to redo. Yeah. So I'm kind of waiting on that, and then I'll do something fun with the video so people can see.
Now, speaking of your videos, you've got a few videos out there of some of your products and things like that, right?
Yes, there are. I have a YouTube channel that I have fun with.
Well,
So I'm getting ready to redo my garden barrel construction video. There were some things that people, you get the same questions over and over again, so you're like, well, maybe I should clarify this a little bit more.
That's actually the video I seen. I was just watching that one earlier today. That's the one I was seeing. So, yeah, I noticed you had some videos out there. But, go ahead and plug away. You've got videos. You got your website. How can people find out more about you and about your products?
Well, they can go to www.halfpinthomestead.com. There's videos. I also write a newsletter, which there's a lot about fodder. It's called Fodder for Thought, but it's not only about hydroponic fodder. Right now I'm doing a series on different perennial fodder plants that are easy to grow for your livestock, because for me it's easier for me to do fodder during the winter and spring, and then feed these other plants during the summer because the mold count's so high in Missouri. It's been hot. Plus, it's good for them to have some variation in their diet. So I did an article on mulberry and one on willow, and the next one's Jerusalem artichoke. And then there are always just little tips about growing fodder and that kind of stuff. It's just a quick newsletter that I do maybe once a month.
Okay.
And then I also have a blog that kind of shows some of the projects that we're doing at the house. So We Haven is what the house is called. So
great.
And that's also available on the front page. The homepage of my website has links to all that. And we also have a Facebook page that I post the articles that I write for different places. So.
Okay, great. Well, I'll put links to all this stuff in the show notes for this podcast. I did have as you were sitting there talking, it made me think about something. Fodder systems. Back to that real quick. Wheat, barley, oats. Which one do you like the best?
Okay, oats do not work at all.
Really?
No. In fact, I almost gave up the whole idea because I tried it with oats to begin with, and at the end of day 6, it was just, so I prefer wheat. Barley has that hull on it, and the hull tends to break down and get slimy, so it's kind of hard to control the slimy and the mold with that hull. Wheat is a little less finicky about perfect conditions, and since my systems are just in your house, the temperature's not exactly 72 degrees all the time, and and wheat just tends to not have as many issues with that as barley, but both of them work. I've had people use both.
Sure. Well, I just see this conversation in a couple of groups all the time. People arguing which one's the best, but now we know the professional has spoke, so we know now.
Now, my favorite thing to do is to sprinkle some black oil sunflower seeds on top.
Yeah. The boss.
And my rabbits really do well on those.
Yeah, they love it too.
Yes, they do. Although I did have one buck who it took a month before he would not look insulted when I put fodder in his cage. Yeah, I was switching him over from pellets, and he just looked so insulted when I would put that fodder in. And he really didn't take to it until I had completely gotten rid of all the pellets, and then he started to eat it.
Didn't have a choice.
Right. You know, they always had free choice hay, but he was a picky eater. So.
Well, that's fascinating. Well, like I said, it sounds like you know what you're talking about when it comes to that more than most. You've been doing it for a while and putting these systems together. So yeah, that's interesting because I was actually working on the barley more than the wheat, but I'd heard a lot of people say that they like the barley best, so I've been going that route. And I hadn't tried oats. I won't now. So that's good to know. Well, hey, I'm really glad you came on here today. Do you have anything you'd like to say, maybe to that person who is in their little house in the city limits that says, one day, I'm going to have a homestead?
I would say just start. Just pick one thing and learn about it. And only pick one thing. Do one thing at a time. Give yourself some time to learn that one thing and then go to the next thing. And before you know it, you're doing all these things and people are going, oh my gosh, you know so much.
That's exactly right.
But it's just one step at a time.
Yeah, very good advice. Well, Sherry, thanks for coming on the podcast today. It's been great having you on here.
Well, thank you for having me.
Thanks for listening. To see the show notes for this podcast or listen to other podcast episodes, go to smalltownhomestead.com. There you can also read our blog, connect with us on Facebook, Twitter, and Google+, and take advantage of the many resources we make available to help you along in your homesteading journey. Please share this podcast and help us to carry out our mission of helping others to homestead today for a better tomorrow.